now's where you're starting to build your team. You're starting to build your core group of your team. You're starting to see who your leaders are. You're starting to understand more of a flow. And as a rookie, you're starting to understand, okay, this is the NFL now.
That right there was our friend Jeremiah Searles, Matthew Collar, ESPN's Courtney Cronin. Welcome into Purple Daily. And we have some mildly breaking NFL news to get to right off the bat, as well as Adam Schefter saying on TV that OTAs do not appear as if they're going to go off. Which would you rather start with, the playoff format or the possibility of OTAs being shut down, Courtney?
Let's do the playoff format. That's fair.
Okay.
That's just there's a conference call that's going on. We also found out, Dan Graziano just tweeted this, that the league does not anticipate the 2020 schedule being released later than May 9th. So it sounds like it could get pushed back. There's always that weird window that we kind of hear things leaking out that it's about the week before the draft, or typically the week before the draft, but it sounds like it could be a little bit later than that. But at least they have a set date that they're not going to go any later. They don't anticipate going any later than May 9th.
So it looks like the NFL playoff format will be kind of what we thought when they signed the new CBA, that there are going to be 7 teams on each side in the AFC and NFC who get into the playoffs. The owners have voted to approve the expansion to 14 total teams. And Kevin Seifert has a nice write-up on ESPN about this. The number 2 seed is now going to host the number 7 seed. So there will not be 2 buys. It's just 1 buy. And the big result of this is right away this year, we get more playoff football.
I think it's a great thing, especially this year, given all the uncertainty about the 2020 season, to know that at least on the horizon, you have more playoff football. And I know there are going to be people saying it's going to water down the format. This was the way that this thing was trending anyways, is we saw how much intrigue there was wild card weekend from the 2019 season. People are going to want to tap into that, i.e. streaming services, television networks. This was the way it was trending for quite some time, even before 3 weeks ago now, whatever it was, when they ratified the CBA. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't think it waters stuff down. At least it might feel like that initially. I do think eventually this is going to weed out, or I guess level out, and we could see, a much better format when you, instead of having, the 1 seeds get the bot. When you look at the Super Bowl teams that have, the last 7 years, all of those teams have had a first round bye.
Yeah.
Now maybe this, could level out the playing field a little bit. I don't think we're going to feel it right away, but over time, over the next 5-10 years, this could certainly help change the notion that if you don't get that 1 seed and you don't get home field advantage, that your road is exponentially harder to try to get to that last Sunday of the season.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point, because the 2 teams having the bye has really opened the door for a pretty significant advantage there for those 2 teams. And now it's only going to be 1, which means that you can get surprised and get knocked out if you're the 1 seed. And maybe it does increase the chances of non-1 or 2 seeds, because the 2 seed essentially it matters because you get to host that game, but it doesn't matter anywhere near as much. I think the impact that we'll see right away is a team that starts 0-3. That's not it for you. Like, historically, you can only come back at, 1 every 150 times or something. It's only a few teams that have ever started 0-3 and come back and ultimately made the playoffs, because you just get so far behind. So if your team gets off to a slow start, you still feel like you've got a chance to get to 8-8, to get to 9-7, and still get into the playoffs, which at that point is your only goal if you've started off 0-3. The other thing is that middle of the season, and this may even increase the intrigue at the trade deadline. We don't often see huge trades. A couple of years ago, Golden Tate got traded at the trade deadline. There's a few other. Jordan Howard, I think, may have gotten traded at the trade deadline to Philly or something like that. No, Jay Ajayi. That's who it was. In the year that they won the Super Bowl, he got traded from Miami to Philadelphia. But now, if teams feel like they're in it, it puts more pressure on those teams that are on the bubble to try and get that last playoff seed. And it becomes especially bad if you don't make the playoffs. And I still like, Courtney, that this has the most discerning playoff format. The NBA puts in half the teams. The NHL puts in half the teams. Major League Baseball, of course, very similar. in that it's not letting in everybody and anybody into the postseason. So I like that it's still hard. It still means something, but it increases the playoff races and the in the bubble graphics as we go down the stretch, and just gives hope to more teams that normally might not have them.
And that's okay to me. Like, I'm trying to look at this with the glass half full approach because I do think that there are people who are not thrilled, especially how this treats the number 2 seed. Now that you have to have 3 wins instead of 2 to reach the Super Bowl. I get that. It's going to change the playing field for some of those higher seeds in good and bad ways. I mean, you think about it, number 2 seeds for the last few years, specifically the last 2 Super Bowls, they've won. Like that's been the way that this whole thing is shaken out. And the conference division alignment, like Kevin points out in his article, that a total of 5 times since that format change in 2002, the 2 seeds have been in that situation. So I think that they kind of get maybe the raw end of this deal, just given kind of the path that they're going to have to take.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
It's definitely going to be more difficult to reach the Super Bowl, but in a way, I think it just ups the ante that much more in that, weeks 14 through 17, when you have teams that are fighting for that 7th spot, because we know there's going to be 3 wild card teams from the AFC and the NFC, so now there's that extra spot. I think it's going to make those games more competitive. Like, think about like Vikings Bengals from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, let's say that's a different situation. I mean, obviously that's the day that the Vikings locked up the NFC North. But let's say, you're in a situation, maybe that's not the right example, but those boring games that end up for a lot of teams, becoming a wash there at the end of the season. Well, maybe you're a 7-9 team at that point, and it actually is important. I think it creates good things for viewership, and it kind of changes the way that we look at some of those late season games and thinking, oh, well, the playoff field's already set. It's all but 1 or 2 teams. Now it could be several teams that are fighting for at least positioning, jockeying for positioning in those final spots. Like, think about how fun it was this year when it comes down to that final play to figure out what's happening with Seattle. Like,
Yep.
I mean, I kind of hope it's like that every single year, that final Sunday night football game means something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of, is that Seattle and San Francisco Giants game that we all tuned into like it was a playoff game to watch. And we want that every year. And I think that this increases the chances of having that with only one shot at getting the bye. If you lock up a bye, whether it's the first or second bye, a lot of teams will sit their starters or something like that. And now you're going to have to really push for it if you want that bye. And I'll be interested to see as we go forward in the future just how much that one team benefits, because the number 1 seed doesn't always win, but the 1 or 2 has, as you mentioned, really dominated the postseason. And part of it, we saw it in San Francisco. Not only did the 49ers get to play at home after the Vikings had to travel to New Orleans and then all the way out to Santa Clara, but they also got to sit at home and do nothing and not play. It was a huge, huge advantage. Now only one team gets it. Yeah, that team could get knocked off, or we could see that team, the number 1 seed, have an even bigger advantage. It increases how much the regular season matters to fight for that 1 seed. But I wonder if 5 years from now, we'll be looking at it and say, yeah, 5 number 1 seeds won the Super Bowl 5 years in a row, and maybe this is too much of an advantage.
Yeah, and that's why it's going to take some time to see the real impact on this. I don't know in 2020 that we're going to be able to be like, yeah, this was a win, this was the right call, because it might honestly feel exactly like it did last year, the year before that, et cetera, et cetera. I think where this is really going to come into play is as we see the schedule, the regular season schedule, get expanded further whenever that happens, when they start creating that 17th game. How does that affect what this playoff seeding is going to look like in maybe, because they have until they have until 2021 or 2022 to add that 17th game in. It's not going to obviously take place in 2020, but we know that over the next few years they're going to add that in. So how does that affect playoff seeding when you have an entire extra game on your schedule, and that's going to factor in injuries and how players are performing, and trends and losing streaks, winning streaks. I think it changes the way that I think that's the point where we start to see the playoff format really come to a head and look different than it did in years past.
Okay, the other thing was Adam Schefter talking about how OTAs, that there isn't much of a chance that they're going to have them. And I wrote about this, and we talked with Jeremiah Searles. You heard it at the start of the show about the potential impact on the Minnesota Vikings. And this goes for lots of other teams too, but teams with a lot of roster turnover, if there are no OTAs, these are something that football fans could not care any less about. We reporters go out there and we interview players at OTAs, and we write about things that they're installing and the basic storylines that are coming out of it. And the rookies show up and we interview them and write about their first impressions of the league. But inside the building, there's a heck of a lot going on with OTAs that Jeremiah explained really, really well on the show the other day. And it could have a pretty big impact on a team like the Vikings, that they're going to be looking for multiple rookies to be taking over starting positions, multiple free agents that are looking to learn Mike Zimmer's defense and Gary Kubiak's offense. That does put them in a pretty difficult position if we're planning on having training camp and the start of the season on time.
Well, what's the one thing that we've heard from any of these free agent press conferences? What do you want to call them? They're not press conferences. They're digital press conferences. Conference calls, yeah. That thing too. Some of them have been Zoom. Some of them have been conference calls. But I think about what Frank Reich said today when he spoke over the phone or over Zoom, whatever it was, with Indianapolis reporters about Phillip Rivers. And he mentioned something, I think it was that Rivers knows 80 to 85% of the offense. Obviously, some of the audibles are going to be different. Some of the terminology is going to be different. But that was, a selling point for both parties and why he would join on with the Colts. Think back to Nick Foles and why that familiarity helped him get to Chicago. He's played for Bill Lazor. He's played for Matt Nagy. He's played for John DeFilippo. In a shortened offseason, which Schefter, he had Tom Mayer, the NFLPA's medical director, on his podcast, and they re-aired this on NFL Live just about an hour ago. And the question was, are we going to see football season played in 2020? And I think that, Mayer handled this very well, saying, I don't know. He's very optimistic, but it's too early to tell. And he took it as far as with the off-season program. He said that, it looks highly unlikely. And Adam took it a step further and said that there will not be OTAs. There will not be an off-season program. And we're certainly waiting for the NFL just to be like, all right, we're nixing this, the official word. But Schefter, in my opinion, his word's as good as anybody. So there's not going to be an off-season program. Let's get that through our heads and realize, okay, well, what do these teams have to do if you have as many rookies like Minnesota is primed to get out of 12 draft picks in April, a few weeks from now? Like, you're definitely at a disadvantage if you're in that position versus where you have, obviously the quarterback position is totally different, and having that institutional knowledge of an offense is huge. But that's a benefit to the Colts. That's a benefit to the Bears to have guys who already know so much of what they're going to be running in their new teams. It really makes you think, like Jeremiah told us last week on the show, that the learning curve is going to be the steepest it's ever been, and you're going to see less rookie impacts by and large in the 2020 season, because a truncated season for those guys where they don't even have the chance to get in the building, learn how to work out, learn how to eat, learn how to do life as a true NFL player, that's going to hurt them in the long run.
No, it definitely will. And I guess it puts a lot or even more pressure on the Vikings offense, because Kirk Cousins gets to come back in an offense that he knows 95% of already, with the same terminology and the same number one receiver, very likely the same running back, which we need to talk a little bit more about where that stands right now with Dalvin Cook. But assuming that they get a contract extension worked out with Dalvin Cook and most of the offensive line, maybe they'll bring back Josh Klein. They brought back Dakota Dozier and Brett Jones. And the comment that I see is, why are they bringing these guys back? Well, part of it could be that they know the offense already. And Dakota Dozier is somebody who was with Rick Dennison in New York. Like, he knows it to a T. Brett Jones is a really intelligent player. Like, these guys who are going to be fill-ins have to know the offense extremely well. So they will have an advantage there. Tajay Sharp is the only guy at this moment who's going to be somewhat of an impact player who's got to step in. But Rudolph and Irv Smith, Adam Thielen, all those guys, they know exactly what they're doing. Of course, the focal point of the offense, C.J. Ham, he knows exactly what he's doing in this offense. So everything to me this entire offseason, Courtney, points toward, if your offense remains good as it was last year, that you can be one of those 7 playoff teams. You might not be a number 1 seed. In fact, I would almost completely count that out. But I think the offense even has to be better than it was last year because there were a number of games where the defense was so good. Atlanta, Los Angeles, for example, that you just won because the defense was so good. And you didn't even have to be good offensively or explosive. This year, I think you have to be more consistent offensively all the way through, not just in the month of October, and be one of the 5 best offenses in the NFL if you're going to be one of those legitimate contenders come playoff time. And that might even rest more now on that if OTAs are indeed canceled.
Well, and that's why I think the Vikings are not really in great position right now, just in that vein, because think about how many impact rookies they're going to need at several different spots, or not even just rookies, new starters. Think about the cornerback group. Like if you have Mike Hughes, Holton Hill, maybe another player that you draft high. I did in one of my draft sims that we can certainly get to. Those are all new starters. I mean, yeah, 2 of those guys have been in the program now going on 3 seasons, but that's still the learning curve is going to be there for them. And if you don't already have that experience of playing your position and being able to pick up where you left off, if that's even the right way to look at this in 2020 from where you were a year ago, I think it's going to be tough on those teams specifically. So yeah, like you said, the offense right now has a multitude of a lot of the same pieces, and what they're bringing back depth pieces, which is important because those guys, you need depth on the offensive line, and those guys all know the offense. You don't really want to be making wholesale changes right now and trying to fix things that you might be able to get away with doing what you were doing a year ago. And I bring that up with the offensive line. Riley Reef, the thought of moving him inside, and we've kind of tossed that idea around. What if they bring in Trent Williams? What if they draft a tackle? Do you really want to be experimenting? Is the right call to be experimenting with that move when your off-season program could be eliminated and you might get straight to training camp and have to deal with Riley Reef moving inside to guard and a brand new left tackle? Like, that seems like a huge challenge to me.
Definitely does.
I don't know, that scares
Definitely
me
does.
even talking about it. Just like the thought of, if I was planning this thing out, that would give me a headache because how do you make that work? And sure, a rookie left tackle is different than somebody who was a Pro Bowl left tackle, but and I'm obviously throwing out the Trent Williams thing just because I need a name to throw in there. It's different challenges for different players, but playing the same position, but they're both challenges that could come to a head this year and really hurt your offense. So we talk about that continuity factor and that stability factor. I think the Vikings are trying to do whatever they can just because they know their battle is harder than most teams, given how much turnover they've had. And trying to take that step forward on offense in a shortened period of time is not going to be easy.